Labour are rethinking winter fuel allowance, somewhat of a U-turn, we might say, Anushka. And it was a bit of a surprise one. I mean, there has been speculation in recent days that this might happen, but I remember you saying a few weeks ago you really didn't think they were going to do this, and then here they are, obviously under massive pressure after the local elections, seemingly feeling like they've got no choice.
You didn't watch the news yesterday, Paul. We said they definitely were going to do this, and they've been thinking about it for a long time. Although I have to say, last summer, when people were saying you need to U-turn now, the attitude inside Downing Street was, we can't do that. That if we U-turn on this, it looks like we are basically willing to flex at any sign of pressure. But that has changed quite dramatically, partly because of the local elections. And actually, I was just looking back at some of the WhatsApps I received from MPs, Labour MPs, on the morning of that. One said, this is a word I can't say on a podcast, mess. Ultimately, the result of a bunch of incompetence. That's a message from a Labour MP. There were things like, basically, oh yeah, winter fuel was idiocy. Others were saying to me they just heard it on the doorstep and it needed to change. Talking to people in Downing Street this week, and I think ever since those local elections, it's been clear that they were going to tweak this at some point, not fully reverse it, as some have suggested, and they won't fully reverse it. What they said to me was, we're not going to do it now, we're not going to do it in the spending review. We need to do it attached to a fiscal event. And the reason we need to do that is because we want to try and show that we can afford to do it. But the reality is, it's the biggest mistake the government has made so far, and they've known it was a big mistake since only a few weeks afterwards. But the local election results has forced their hand. What will be interesting is the detail. How far do they actually go? If they're going to raise the threshold at which you lose winter fuel without raising the threshold for pension credit, then that's very expensive, and it will make you think, why did they bother with any of this in the first place? Why the political pain? If, on the other hand, they raise both thresholds together, then many more people will qualify for pension credit, which is also very expensive. So it is a difficult position for them to be in. But in hindsight, Keir Starmer looks at this and knows that he was kind of walked into a political disaster.
Also shows to me the power of pensioners, right, in politics, because here they are having the winter fuel payments reversed. Obviously, there are lots of pensioners in hardship, and some of those who have their winter fuel allowance cut will feel as though they cannot afford that cut. But at the same time, you've got, for example, Liz Kendall, the Welfare Secretary, going out this morning saying that she's sticking to her plan to cut welfare, including for disabled people. You've got a massive row in the Labour Party going on about child benefit and whether that should be reversed. The two-child limit on child benefit that was introduced by the previous government should be reversed. None of those things have yet been turned into a U-turn or a change in policy. It is winter fuel allowance. So it is, pensioners, again, who seem to be the priority in politics because, as we know, pensioners vote.
I think the problem they've got on this is basically it wasn't actually the principle of it, which was the idea of why are we giving winter fuel payments to millionaires. They always give the example of Mick Jagger. It was basically the execution of it, which was the mistake. Yeah, I don't know why they always choose Mick Jagger. Wonder if he actually gives his back. It was the execution and it was the framing of it. And I remember when this first happened and I realised that they were using pension credit as the cut-off. And I spoke to Age UK, the charity at the time, and they said that means that, almost 1 million poor pensioners are going to be wrapped up in this, are going to lose their winter fuel because pension credit had terrible uptake. And there was a press conference in the Downing Street Garden, and it was the same time that they were giving out, big payouts to doctors and to train drivers. And I said to Keir Starmer, why are you basically balancing the books on the back of pensioners? And his argument at the time, and it still is that the principle was correct. But he accepted and behind the scenes certainly knew very forcefully that the framing looked very bad, that they were doing payouts to train drivers at the same time as taking money off pensioners. And the fury from winter fuel has just been another level. You mentioned welfare. They're absolutely sticking to their guns for now on the welfare policies, but they've got a really big political problem there too. And insiders say to me there will be concessions because otherwise they won't win a vote of Labour MPs.
Yeah, it was interesting when I interviewed Liz Kendall a couple of weeks ago. Last week, actually, she was saying that absolutely no way are they going to change their plans on welfare, but they had no further plans, which to me suggests, as you're saying, that maybe that's where the compromise is going to come. They're not going to reverse the cuts they've already announced, but they won't go too much further or too much harder when it comes to further cuts that were rumoured to be on the cards. And then we've got Angela Raina today as well in the newspapers saying, well, she's not saying, it's been leaked, that she wanted to raise taxes rather than cut welfare. So there is this tension within the party, as we've long suspected, between different cabinet members about the right path to go down here. What did you make of this alleged row between her and the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves?
Well, I mean, her argument, the argument that people around her are saying, is basically it is normal to have conversations when you're deciding on things. And in the spring statement, there was a decision that the government took to try to save most of the money on welfare cuts. They've got very strict fiscal rules. If they want to stick to them, there is another option, and that is to raise taxes. And there is clearly a divide in the party about that. I was just walking down the corridor, bumped into a Labour MP whose worries about the welfare cuts, not all of them, but one particular part, which is the cuts to disability benefits, is that they're not convinced that that's to do with the thing that Liz Kendall was arguing this morning, which was about getting more people into work. They think it was simply to save money for the Treasury. And I think there is a sense among Labour MPs that there's anger at Rachel Reeves. People talk about Treasury orthodoxy. You know, there was a letter from Red Wall MPs recently after the local election results, which talked about Treasury orthodoxy and this idea that their hands are tied because of their own self-imposed rules. The alternative, if you're going to stick to the rules, obviously, is what we think now that Angela Raina was trying to suggest, which is to raise a bit more money from tax rather than take the money off disability benefits, particularly because that bit of the welfare package is the bit that makes it really hard to argue, which most MPs would agree with, that we need to try and help disabled people get back into work.
And where do you think the bulk of the party is? Because you've spent some time the past few days talking to MPs, as you always do, of course, but also travelling the country to see what voters think about these welfare cuts. And I know you've been to 3 different constituencies to try and get the most comprehensive picture you can of how voters feel and how MPs feel. Where do you think the party lies? Are they sort of more in the Angela Raina camp of we should have been focusing on taxing the wealthy, or are they more in the Chancellor's camp of saying, no, cut welfare and stick to the fiscal rules?
I mean, I think on the issue of welfare, there has also been a dramatic change in mood in the party since those local election results, because actually a lot of MPs were hearing welfare come up on the doorstep as well. So before those election results, the whips, obviously the people who try and corral the votes of the Labour Party, were saying to me, we'll win, we just don't know by how much. This is a vote in June on those welfare reforms. Since then, similar types of people were saying to me, this is a big problem. The numbers we're talking about are large. We are going to have to come forward with something. And there are particular concessions I think they will come forward with. But I went to 3 parts of the country because there's a report doing the round among MPs which looks at the places in the country which are hardest hit by the welfare cuts. It's by Health Equity North, and what it shows is the top 10 constituencies that are going to lose out are all Labour held, and they're all in the red wall in the north. The ones that are least badly hit are all Lib Dem and Tory, largely in the south, and a lot of them are in the northeast. And I went to Hartlepool, and then north to Easington, and then north again to Sunderland South and Horton. I think it might be Horton and Sunderland South, which were all in the top 10. Easington is number 1, to kind of get a sense of how people were feeling. And in Hartlepool, I met an MP, Jonathan Brash, who's going to vote against his party if this doesn't change, even though he's been pretty loyal overall, because he keeps hearing it on the doorstep. Now, in Downing Street, I think they think that welfare cuts are quite popular, but the polling doesn't actually seem to bear that out at the moment, not about these particular cuts. And it was interesting. He said they'd had a by-election in a council election there in a previously safe Labour seat, and they had lost to Reform, and he heard welfare on the doorstep quite a lot. Like we've been hearing all over the country, there were a lot of people who were really scared about the impact of these reforms up in Easington. What's happened there is there's a lot of disability linked to the old coal factories that used to be there, and the kind of death of that industry has meant there are no jobs for people to go into. And I wanted to go one more north because that's held by a Cabinet Secretary, Bridget Phillipson. And again, I was hearing similar things. It was amazing the number of people we met who were actually on PIP. Now, I should say, That said, we did meet people who do feel that too many people are on benefits and that some people are getting benefits who perhaps don't deserve to get them. And that is a thing that's borne out in the polling. And I think Downing Street feel that actually a lot of Labour voters perhaps agree with this more than they may be publicly saying.